On the 11th of February 1979, 5 young men, Scott Moorman, Benjamin Kalama, Peter Hanchett, Patrick Wosner and Ralph Malaikini, disappeared in a violent storm after going out fishing off the coast of Hawaii in a boat called the Sarah Joe. 10 years later, Scott Moorman was found buried on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands, and the question asked is, if all the other crewmen perished, who buried Scott Moorman? The Sarah Joe was not equipped for any major sea voyages and was really only meant for coastal use. The crew left the town of Hana on the Hawaiian island of Maui in near perfect conditions for sailing, with barely any wind and smooth seas. Unfortunately, the men had not bothered to check any weather reports, and within a couple of hours a major low pressure system was fast approaching the islands, and none of the men were expert sailors. When most of the boats had returned to port, the Sarah Jones was unaccounted for. When the Coast Guard realised the men had not returned, they set out along the coastline with virtually nil visibility, but the severe weather conditions soon forced them back to land. The following day, the Coast Guard recommenced its mission along with other boats and aircraft. The search continued for 5 days, covering 70,000 square miles of ocean, but the men and their boat had completely disappeared. They even tried using homing pigeons, specially trained to locate people lost at sea. After a week, the Coast Guard concluded that the Sarah Jones had not survived the rough conditions and must have sunk along with its crew. Family and friends of the missing men continued searching for another 3 weeks, focusing on some of the remote islands, hoping the boat had become shipwrecked on one of them. They found no trace of the men or the boat. 10 years later, several of the original search party members were on a routine wildlife mission in the uninhabited islands of the Western Pacific for the National Marine Fisheries Service. On the 10th of September 1988, biologist John Norton was working at Taongi Atoll in the Marshall Islands, approximately 2,200 miles southeast of Hawaii, when he came across an abandoned fiberglass boat. He checked part of the registration of the boat and ascertained that it came from somewhere in the Hawaiian Islands. He had found the Sarah Joe. Norton and his team found there was nothing inside or around the boat and found no signs of life or any kind of equipment that might provide clues. They then searched the surrounding area and made a gruesome discovery about 100 yards from the boat. A makeshift cross fashioned from driftwood was sticking out of the top of a shallow grave, where a human mandible bone was protruding out. There were blank pieces of paper loosely stacked on top of the skeleton. In between each sheet of paper was tinfoil. They sent the skeleton to a forensic lab for testing, where results revealed that the remains were those of Scott Moorman. So, if the rest of the crew all perished at sea, who buried Scott Moorman? Strangely though, 4 years before Norton and his team arrived on the island, another research team had previously landed there and reported nothing out of the ordinary. Finding the wreck of a boat might not have raised any questions, but how did they fail to discover the grave? Was Scott Moorman the lone survivor who managed to swim to the island but then found himself alone in the middle of the Pacific without any supplies and no hope of rescue? The fact that the boat survived one of the worst storms on record and ended up on a desolate atoll thousands of miles away was not only an amazing accomplishment, but a mystery in itself. Authorities agreed that the Sarah Joe could have drifted the 2,000 miles to the Marshall Islands. The voyage would have taken about 3 months. However, according to the brother of one of the missing men, the US government did a survey of Taongi in 1985 and found no trace of the Sarah Joe. If this is true, then where was the Sarah Joe between its 1979 disappearance and the 1985 survey?